So be it, Jedi.
What's going on, guys? Back in another video, another episode of Read or Skip It. Today we're on book 3 of A.C. Crispin's Han Solo Trilogy, Rebel Dawn. This story takes place right where the second book ended. Han Solo is on Bespin with Lando, and they're gambling, they're trying to win big. Han Solo ends up winning the Millennium Falcon, much to Lando's dismay. So then we're told Han and Chewbacca go on a lot of adventures, smuggling, they're sort of at the height of their game. A lot of this, honestly, gets glossed over. We don't really hear a lot about it, but we're just told that they're doing pretty good for themselves. As we saw in the first two novels, Han Solo's ex-girlfriend, Bria Theren, is even more of a player in this story. We touch base with her, and she's now a commander with the rebellion. She's pulling strings, trying to, get the ball rolling for the Rebel Alliance. Durga the Hutt, the now leader of the Basadi clan, is still trying to figure out what happened to his parent. He contacts Black Sun, but really doesn't want to get Prince Shizor involved because he knows if he does, there really is no way out. But he's still trying to figure out how his parent was murdered. Now that Han has the Millennium Falcon, he and his girlfriend Shala have been sort of competing against one another, racing and trying to make runs faster than the other. And they're at Kessel with the Maw, and they try to, race each other back. Well, Shala ends up getting sucked into a black hole. Her ship is destroyed, and she's barely saved by the skin of her teeth by Han and the Millennium Falcon. This causes her to become very clingy and almost acts out of desperation now that she's lost her ship. She tells Han that she wants to get married, and Han's like, I don't want to get married. What are you talking about? And he ends up just dipping out of there and leaving without telling her, what's going on. So that's where he and Chewbacca leave and go to the corporate sector. And this is where Brian Daley's Han Solo Trilogy takes place. Now, I've already read the first novel of Brian Daley's trilogy, and I'm about halfway through the second. So prior to reading those, I had no idea what was going on. And this was the first time in a Star Wars novel where you're hit with an interlude, because A.C. Crispin wrote her stories in and around an already established trilogy that Brian Daley wrote in the late 70s and early 80s. So at this point, and for a little bit, Han Solo is pretty much out of the story. We touch base with him a couple times, but he really doesn't come back until later on. Han and Chewbacca go to Kashyyyk. We see a lot of, honestly, what ended up being in the prequels and Revenge of the Sith with Kashyyyk. Chewie meets up with a woman that he hasn't seen in 50 years. They get married, and Han thinks that, well, now I'm going to be on my own. Well, no, Chewie still has the life debt to him, so he ends up staying with him after getting married. We touch base with Lando, and he's getting ready to get on some big starliner, some big cruise ship to travel somewhere, and incidentally, he encounters Bria Theren. Now, he doesn't really know who this is until he learns that her name is Bria, and that's when he brings up, like, Bria, like Han Solo, Han Solo. And they talk about it for a little bit, and then Boba Fett, who is hired to track down Bria, encounters them. Something that I found really interesting with Boba Fett in this story is he really does give off like Anton Chigurh vibes of No Country for Old Men. I mean, he is just like a cold, calculated sociopath, but he does stick to like a moral compass. And I thought that was really interesting. Personally, I never really had much affinity for Boba Fett. So I could definitely see why those that read these novels when they were coming out, just thought Boba Fett was awesome, because we didn't know a whole lot about him. The way he, presented himself, the way he acted is very interesting. And it really is disappointing that he ends up being the Boba Fett he is now with the current timeline. So Boba Fett is going to capture Bria and take her off to collect his bounty. She's wanted alive. Lando gets involved because Boba Fett has beef with Lando from the last story where they pretty much knocked him out. Well, you think everybody's doomed, but it's not until Lando's ex-girlfriend, who is a pirate, who we saw in the previous novel, The Hutt Gambit, comes in and essentially buys their way out, because Boba Fett is facing like 30 armed pirates, and he really sees no way to get out of the situation that includes Bria being alive. We learn that Bria is really still obsessed with Ylesia and she wants to liberate the whole planet. There have been mentions of rebel attacks on the planet that have resulted in a few slaves being saved. She sort of convinces the rebel command that in doing so, they'll be able to gain more people to join their cause. And you can tell that she's pretty much switched from being addicted to the exaltation to being addicted to the rebellion and, fighting that cause. Eventually, Han and Bria meet and reunite after like 10 years separated. Uh, this is the same cliche of a toxic relationship not really changing after a course of time. So they get back together, they sort of rekindle their love, and it's honestly bittersweet because Han thinks that, Bria is going to ride or die for him. He thinks that this is, them getting back together and everything going to be fine. But as we soon find out, that Bria is honestly just a bad, shitty person. We'll get to that shortly. So Durga finally gives up and hires Black Sun to figure out who murdered his parent. We find out that it was the Silgic, Jabba's clan, more specifically Gileak, Jabba's aunt, and Tarawinza was the one that slowly poisoned Durga's parent with these delicacy frogs that he liked to eat. So this puts, the target on the Silgic clan, but also makes Durga in debt to Black Sun. It's not really a good thing. Bria convinces Han to help her liberate Ylesia. And in doing so, he contracts a lot of his smuggler buddies to get on board with the promise of, hey, there's going to be a ton of spice here. There's going to be a lot of things that you could pillage, and you get a certain percentage of this by helping me and then fledgling rebellion liberate it. At the last minute, Bria meets with her rebel superiors, and they tell her that they can't afford to let any of the smugglers get anything out of this. So she essentially screws over everybody, of course not telling them yet, and they're essentially doing this for free. They're not getting any payment. They're not getting any money from the spice. And of course, as we'll soon find out, Han Solo isn't very happy about this, and neither is any of his smuggler buddies, who in turn blame Han, thinking he gets paid and they don't. This results in Han just telling Bria she's a piece of crap and that he was wrong for thinking that, she actually cared about him. Her and the other rebels leave. He and Chewbacca are able to find a few things of value in Tarawinza's treasure museum or whatever, but ultimately Han is done with Bria, and it's disappointing. This is where Tarawinza, who was, the high priest of Ylesia, comes out of hiding and, is attempting to kill Han. Well, out of nowhere, Boba Fett shows up because Durga the Hutt put a bounty on Tarawinza for having killed his parent, and just kills the high priest and, ironically, saves Han Solo. Han Solo goes back to just working for Jabba the Hutt, who is now the leader of the Silgic clan. He's just, Han spies for him, smuggling this and that. Well, on a run from Kessel, he gets stopped by the Imperials, and he has to drop his payload. So he hides it in sort of a place where he thinks he can go back and get it. Well, as he goes back to get it, he finds out it's gone. It's not there. So this in turn puts him in debt with Jabba the Hutt. And as we see in A New Hope, that's why Jabba has the bounty on him, because he gives him, a week to come up with the money or the spice. Han can't do it, and then has a bounty on his head. It's assumed that Lando and Han have their falling out because Lando is pissed about not being paid for helping him liberate Ylesia. I don't really know that it is a justifiable reason because, Lando and Han are friends. You think Han would believe, you think Lando would believe Han when he says that I got screwed over too, but who knows? We touched base with Bria one last time, and she is on Tapwara, which is like the Imperial Information Center, pretty much the EU version of Scarif from Rogue One. And her Rebel Command have been sit in to pretty much die. She is the one that sends up the Death Star plans to the Tantive 4 and Princess Leia, and then is killed in the process. So sort of really makes her a very important character. I've yet to read the Death Star novel, but I'd like to learn more about the old EU explanation for how the Death Star was constructed, the Imperial thoughts on all of that. But yeah, I mean, she dies sending up the Death Star plans. Back when Bria was originally captured by Boba Fett on the Starliner with Lando, she tells him that when I die, I want you to tell my father that I died. Well, Boba Fett ends up not being able to realize who her father is, so he comes to Han Solo on Tatooine and tells him that she's dead. Bria's dead. And it's a very sad and tragic thing because, she died supporting something that ultimately is a good thing, but as I said, she very much has an addictive personality, and it's almost like she just switched from one unhealthy habit to one that resulted in her death, even though it was for the greater good. And the story pretty much ends with Han in the Mos Eisley Cantina about to meet up with Luke and Obi-Wan right at the beginning of A New Hope. Perfect ending. I'm glad it ended the way it did. Just some thoughts on the trilogy as a whole. This is probably one of the best trilogies I've read. I love a solid, book. And to have 3 that are this good about Han Solo really just bumps him up a lot in my, character tier list. I'm glad to have read these. I'm glad to have reviewed them. Looking forward to reading the entirety of Brian Daley's trilogy. So far, so good, which, of course, we'll tune into that next week probably. But, yeah, AC Crispin's Han Solo Trilogy is solid. Definitely 10 out of 10 recommend if you just want to know more about Han Solo prior to the original trilogy, or just want to know more about him as a character in general. Definitely recommend. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think down in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, see you on the next one.
I'm sorry, sir. It's time for you to leave.